Does your car's front suspension rattle and bang whenever you're going over bumps while driving? Well, don't worry, in this video I'm going to show you how you can replace your upper and lower control arms so that your car's ride quality is restored. Best of all, we're going to do it for less than half the cost that a mechanic would do it for you. For more on every step of the car flipping process, subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next weekly upload. My name is Benjamin McShannock and welcome back to Ben Flips Cars. Step 1 is to measure the ride height from the center of the wheel to the fender on a flat level surface before you do any work to the car. This is because we're going to want to simulate the ride height later on when we're installing the new control arms. Step 2, you want to loosen the nuts on the wheels and then jack the car up. You can simply do this with the car's spare tyre tools. I'm using a proper jack and jack stands though. Once the car is jacked up, ensure it's safe by giving it a bit of a shake and make sure it's sturdy before you get under the car. Then finish removing the wheel and put it under the car for some extra security just in case the jack stands give way. Next we want to remove the brake caliper. It's simply just 2 bolts on the back and they tend to be pretty tight, so I was using a bit of WD-40 to help me crack them loose and get them out. And then you can hang it out of the way with some zip ties, ensuring that there's no tension on the brake lines. Step 4, remove the brake disc. This should just slide straight off with the brake caliper removed. So this is the first new part we have to install. It's the upper control arm. You can see here, this is it here. So we have to undo 2 bolts there and also undo this. And it should be as simple as removing it and popping in the new one. So first we're going to loosen off this bolt that's basically clamping the knuckle arm to the upper control arm, and with the nut loose you do have to get that bolt out, otherwise you can't disconnect the knuckle and the upper control arm. So step 5, once again hitting them with some WD-40 to loosen the rust up, undo the bolts holding in the upper control arm, and then we're going to remove it. You'll need a spanner of some sort holding the bolt still on one side, because as you're trying to undo the nut on the other side it's going to just spin instead of actually loosening it. Then as you can see, in trying to pull the bolt out, it actually runs into the spring, so we're going to have to move the spring in order to get that bolt out. So first you just wanted to loosen off these 3 nuts at the top of the spring from within the engine bay. Then you had to come down to the bottom of the spring or the strut, remove that nut there and pull that bolt out so that we could slide the strut across and out of the way to let the nut out. And then went to pull this forward, but then your sway bar link's in the way, which has to be disconnected anyway once again because the sway bar link connects to the lower control arm. So if we finish removing the sway bar link here, take that out. Now you can see, pull this across, and once you've also loosened these 1, 2 and 3 nuts there, it allows you to move the suspension enough that now we're going to be able to get those nuts out and remove the upper control arm. Now what I did end up doing was taking those 3 bolts completely off the top there of the suspension, and it allowed me to jiggle the suspension down enough and out enough so that basically those bolts got slotted right into one of these gaps in the springs here, and then I was able to get them out and therefore get the upper control arm out. Now before installing the new upper control arm, we want to compare it with the old one and make sure it's the exact same. So if we lay them top one another, we can see that they're the exact same dimensions, same thread holes, same bushings, and exactly the same shape and size. And you can see what the issue is here. Look how much play is in that old upper control arm bush, whereas if we go to the new one, I can't move that at all. You can see exactly why that needed to be replaced. Now I will mention that you can buy a bush press kit, so you can press out this old bush and you could put in just a new bush if you wanted, but honestly the amount of effort it's going to take you and the amount of stuffing around of trying to get the old bush out and pressing in a new bush, it's just not worth the hassle. To buy a new control arm doesn't cost that much more anyway than buying just the bushes, and it'll save you a lot of time and headache doing it this way. Plus then you guarantee that you have no parts missing because you have the entire control arm as it should be. Now step 7, let's install the new upper control arm. Thread the bolts through and put the nuts on the end. Don't torque anything down just yet, as we have to simulate the ride height before we torque any of the nuts or bolts down. What surprised you the most about the process of replacing the upper control arm? Let me know in the comments down below. Also, if you missed the previous video where I show you how to fix your car smelling like fuel or burning oil when running, check out this video up in the corner where I show you how to replace the valve tubes to fix it. And there you go, our new upper control arm is installed. Now we don't want to tighten these bolts up until we install this part back on, which we're not going to do until we do our lower control arm, which is this big arm that connects there, and here. We've already undone that bolt, as we said, because we wanted to adjust the spring, and we also undid our sway bar links already, which were connected somewhat like that. So if you didn't have to undo them to do the upper control arm like I did, make sure you undo that bolt now and the sway bars. Then you also want to loosen off this bolt, which I actually have already done here. And once that comes off, you should be able to pull this big knuckle thing off. And check this out, you can see why we need to do the lower control arm as well. For one, that bush is absolutely flogged out, and once again on the new arm that's pretty stiff, you almost can't move it. And I imagine these other two bushes aren't going to be much good either. Let's go and loosen off this bolt and this bolt. So as we come under to the lower control arm, we can see there's two bolts, one there, or sorry, nuts rather, and one here. And that nut holds in this part of the arm here, that nut there holds in this part of the arm here. So we got to loosen those two off. There's a particular issue with getting this part of the arm out, which I'm going to touch on in a moment when we get to it. Now these nuts are seriously tight. I think the tightest of the whole job, so make sure you give them a good douse of some WD-40. And unless you have the car jacked up really high, they're pretty tough to get to. What I ended up doing was slotting the ratchet on, and then on the end of the ratchet put my breaker bar on the end of that to break those nuts loose. Once the incredibly tight nut is broken, you can of course get the ratchet on the end and undo it the rest of the way, and once those nuts are off, the bolts are ready to be removed from the lower control arm. Okay, a couple of things to note is as I'm trying to push out this bolt here, you can see it just in there. I'll move it around, see that bolt? Beautifully, the steering arm is blocking the bolt, so I think, okay, I'll move the steering arm down, just bend it out of the way. You can see the sway bar is blocking it. We've just realised all you probably have to do is turn the steering wheel, so let's try that. And there we go, sure enough, with the steering wheel turned, this moved, this came straight out. Moreover, on this side, you can see the other bolt is blocked by this plastic cover, so I have my helper undoing all these bolts, so you can take this plastic cover off, which is not too difficult, just a pain though. And with that plastic cover removed, we can ratchet off the nut and pull the bolts out of the other part of the lower control arm. So managed to get that little plastic sensor out. You have to do it that way because otherwise you won't, because you're going to have a new hole, and a hole like this on the new arm that you have to pop back into. Now time to drop away the K-frame, those bolts, because you can see the arm is nice and loose, so we just need to get it to be able to slot out now. To get out this arm here, you can see this bolt is blocking it and it can only come out sideways here. This path on this one is clear, so no worries. So we can get that part of the arm out. So what we have to do is loosen these 2 bolts just slightly. We don't have to take them all the way off. And that's actually the subframe, the K-frame, and you got to drop that down slightly so that you can get that low enough so that this can come out and not hit that bolt on the way out. So once again, these nuts were very tight, but you could get a little bit more leverage to them because of the way they were positioned. You can see me here ratcheting them off. You don't have to take them all the way off, just get them loose fairly close down to the end of the thread, and that's going to allow you to drop that subframe enough to get out that part of the lower control arm. We're just undoing those 2 nuts on the other side, the symmetrical ones to these, so that it's hopefully, once it loosens off over there, it should be loose enough to come down here. Yeah, there we go. Oh yeah, that bushing's flogged in there. Here we go, comparing the old one to the new one. You can see this bush here was all cracked in there, and you can move it by hand, so that's flogged out. New one, all good of course. You can see once again this doesn't move, whereas this one moves a lot, so you can see our issues here. But now let's reinstall everything, and now that we've taken everything apart, it should be a little bit easier, touch wood, to get everything back together now that we know where everything goes. Finally, it's time to install the new lower control arm. We'll start with the joint at the cross member, so we can first put the cross member back in place, then do the other 2 bolts at the remaining ends of the lower control arms. This includes sliding the knuckle onto the end of the new lower control arm. Next, let's join the new lower control arm to the bottom of the strut or the spring. So pull the lower control arm up and slide the bolt back in that goes between the spring and the lower control arm. Now you'll see with this, the top of the upper control arm, it has to slot into the right bit in the hole, because you can see then there's a gap that forms with that upper bit of the upper control arm. And if you don't get that right, that's not going to slot through. So we've got our 2 bottom bolts back in. We just want to do everything snug initially. We don't want to tighten anything up yet. Got that bolt back in, holding in the shocker. Got our 2 bolts holding in the upper control arms, of course. Slotted it in here and got that bolt in as I just showed there. Another thing, don't forget, pop the clip back in for the ABS center line. There we go. And then once we put our sway bar leg back in as well, we just got to simulate our ride height, and then we can tighten down all the rest of the bolts. Let me show you how that's done. I'll put them in at the same time. That's going to be easiest for us, I think. There we go. So in they go. And then with the nut, I'll show you what I've done, which I thought was pretty clever. So get it on finger tight, and then what I did was you set it to the loosening position actually, and then you get your thingo. And because the sway bar thing rotates, you're able to tighten it that way, and it works surprisingly well. Don't forget to tighten the nuts back down at the top of the strut in the engine bay, the ones that we loosened off earlier, so that we could move the spring around enough to get the upper control arm bolts out. Ensure you simulate the measured ride height from earlier before torquing all the bolts back down, otherwise you risk tearing the new bushes when lowering the car back to the ground. Use the jack to do this, like I am in this clip here, and you can see we've jacked it up to the simulated ride height of about 38.5 centimeters. Now the reason that we jack it up to the simulated ride height is otherwise we can risk tearing those new bushes. Now that we have it to the simulated ride height, we can torque everything down, so let's get to it. So first we have the 2 nuts and bolts at the top of the upper control arm. We torque these down to 50 Newton meters, 90 Newton meters for both the upper and lower ball joints, 120 Newton meters for the lower control arm to cross member and subframe, 55 Newton meters for the sway bar links, 80 Newton meters for the shock to lower control arm, and with everything tightened and torqued up to spec, we can slowly lower the jack down now that everything is tightened to the simulated ride height. Reinstall your brake disc by simply sliding it back on, then slide your brake caliper back on and reinstall the 2 bolts at the back. Place the wheel back on and tighten the nuts down as much as you can whilst the wheel's still in the air. Lower the car back down and torque the wheel nuts down tight in a star-cross pattern. In a star-cross pattern, so it'll be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, get them nice and tight. And also we forgot to mention putting this back on, this plastic bottom cover, so make sure you do that. And then the entire job should be done, and you should be rid of all the clunking going through the front left of your car. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments below, or if you want to connect with me directly, I'm on TikTok and Instagram, also at Ben Flips Cars. Please hit the like button to help me out with the algorithm, and subscribe so you don't miss the next weekly upload. My name's Benjamin McShannock, and thank you for watching Ben Flips Cars.